Hello everyone, welcome to the third in our People Matter webinar programme organised by Cyber Risk Aware in partnership with the Oxford Cyber Academy. Delighted to see you all today from all around the world and from organisations across nearly every industry you can think of, which is great. It's great to have the chance to talk with you today. Really looking forward to today's webinar with Sian from Microsoft and Richard from the Oxford Cyber Academy. Again, I think I can promise you all a fascinating and challenging discussion. No slides, just an informal and hopefully informed chat about one of the most critical areas of business risk excuse me, that any organisation faces, their human cyber risk. Today, we're talking about the importance of and role that digital empathy can play in our security awareness and education. As always, please do feel free to ask questions in the Q&A or the chat during the webinar, and we'll attempt to answer them at the end of our session. So I'm Nick Wilding, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Cyber Risk Aware. I've worked in the cybersecurity sector for far too long. I worked at Detica for 11 years before moving on to Axelos Global Best Practice to set up a new cyber resilience best practice training service that included new security awareness training. I've recently joined the great team at Cyber Risk Aware, where we provide real-time security education and training for employees at their critical point of need, in support of the organisation's wider human cyber risk management goals. I've worked with and advised many organisations, whether that's in the boardroom, with security teams, with HR or L&D, to help them adopt intelligent and evidence-led approaches to security education. I also work closely with academia to better understand the behavioural science and the evidence base for what good security education and behaviour change can look like. For me, we're still at the start of this journey. The goal is that we all naturally do security as part of our daily lives, at home, at work, and on the move. The modern workplace is changing fundamentally, driven by what we've all been through over the last 18 months. Making it even more important for me to adapt our security education around the new working environment we now find ourselves in. Before intros from Richard and Sian, I just also wanted to give you, particularly those that hadn't attended a People Matter webinar previously, to give you a very brief outline of the context and purpose of this programme. We all know that our people are central to our organisation's success, security and resilience. We've also known for many years that cyber criminals, hackers, target people before technology. And for just as long, we've been repeating the mantra that a vigilant, cyber risk aware workforce is our strongest and main defence against cyber criminals. Yet despite all our efforts, we still appear to be struggling to crack the problem. Too many organisations still either ignore the fact that people are their strongest link in their organisational resilience, or apply outdated or compliance-driven approaches to training their employees. Both Cyber Risk Aware and the Oxford Cyber Academy want to bring you the very latest insights, innovation and ideas for effective security change. Richard and I have been working in the area of human risk for many years now, and we both firmly believe we need a fresh look. We need new ideas for making people our strongest link. And that's why we've created the People Matter webinar programme. It's designed to bring leaders in business, in security and academia to the table to share their challenges, lessons learned and new perspectives on this challenging subject. The goal is to help provide guidance, know-how and a trusted network for anyone involved in developing people-centred security cultures and in influencing better security behaviours in their organisation. We can all learn from each other, from others outside security, from academia, and critically, for me, from the very people we educate. It's our employees that typically hold the keys to unlocking so many of the challenges and opportunities we face in security culture awareness and human risk management. So that's enough from me. Can I pass you over now to Richard? Perhaps you'd like to do a brief introduction of yourself and the Academy, Richard, before passing over to Sian.
Thanks, Nick, and very briefly from me also, welcome to everybody. Very nice to see such a big audience, particularly from the US. I've been involved in corporate security now for about 15 years. My major experience as a security director has been in financial services, and then more recently in telecoms. I was the security director in Vodafone for 6 years. And then subsequently, as a consultant, I've got access to some of the issues we're going to be talking about across a wide range of sectors, including automobile, airlines, oil and gas, and so on. I've been working in the Oxford Cyber Academy now for about the last 3 years, and the Academy was set up really in the belief that while there was a tremendous emphasis, quite rightly, in developing technical skills when it came to cybersecurity, there was a gap in the market, in as much as lots of people who were making decisions about investment in cybersecurity actually were neither technical nor security specialists. And so we try to meet the gap by explaining in layman's terms why cybersecurity is so important, at least in my courses, and the steps that need to be taken to make sure that the correct investment and the correct approach is taken to securing our security in cyber, because all of our businesses, of course, are thoroughly reliant on cyber. Just to give a gloss to what Nick said about the origin of this particular series of People Matter webinars, I, in one sense, perhaps feel a bit like a politician. All political careers end in failure. And I think if I look at my time as a corporate security director, we put a tremendous effort into security awareness. And yet we see now, and not just in my old business, but across the space, a huge number of cyber attacks increasing at a dizzy rate. And at the same time, the vast majority of those successful attacks actually being caused at some point by a human error. And I think you don't need to be a rocket scientist to realize that the combination of these two things mean that we have consistently failed for years in educating our staff, in leading them to correct behaviors, so that we can actually get at least those stubborn figures around the guilt of humans in managing cybersecurity to come down. So I think Nick and I have agreed that this is a really good forum for getting people's ideas, discussions going. We need a radical approach, I think it seems to us. But I think, and I hope, that nicely tees up Sian. Perhaps you'd like to say a few words about yourself, and then you can kick off with your introductory remarks.
Yes, so I'm Sian John. I'm currently a Senior Director in Microsoft's Business Development Group, not the salesy business development, the one that actually looks at actually how we develop and expand Microsoft security capabilities going forward. So really looking at strategic growth, big bets that Microsoft can be making. And you may be following the news, but we have recently committed to a major investment in cybersecurity over the next 5 years of 20 billion in both making our technology more secure, but also security offerings. I've been working in the industry for, I think, it's around about 25 years now, I think, starting off working in public sector in security, and then in consulting, and then into technical sales, strategy, and then now in looking at our future development. So I've seen it all come and go when it comes to security, from the sort of doing deep technical things to the sort of people side, and quite often, as we've gone on that evolution from almost IT and information security to cyber security, which I know annoys some people, that term, but to me, cyber just means that the business cares in a way that they didn't when it was IT and information security. They might not understand it, but they vaguely care about it. They might still think it's an IT problem, but they vaguely care about it. And I think all the threats that we've seen over the last few years, and that increasing threat landscape reflects that. But the one thing that's always been a challenge as you go along, there's lots of technical things we can do, there's lots of approaches to how we protect, but it's actually, again, as Nick and Richard have been saying, the challenge is getting people to understand the threat and do the right thing and behave that way. And some of it is the way that we've traditionally done security awareness has been very much preaching at people and talking at people and saying this is what you can do, and not really necessarily engaging with and understanding where they're coming from. And so if you want me to put some introductory remarks in about the concept of digital empathy, that really is a concept that's come out at Microsoft in terms of actually not insecurity, but when you're actually thinking about implementing technology, it's actually thinking about how the people are going to use it, engage with it, and having empathy to their experience. Not sympathy. Sympathy means you let them do whatever they want to do. But empathy is actually understanding they might be coming from a different place to where you are. They might be doing different things, they might be busy. Now that's been very important over the last year in the pandemic, the need to have really empathy to the fact that someone's not sitting at a desk in an office, they might be in their house with their children screaming, and if you make things very difficult to engage with, that becomes hard. Now for us, digital empathy at Microsoft is actually across all our technology. It's about making sure technology is easy to use, but it's absolutely essential to us that we do that in security. And so, you know, for the last 25, 30 years, if you look at a lot of the user stuff we've done in terms of security, it almost includes the equivalent of someone having to stand up, turn around 3 times while patting the head and rubbing their stomach at the same time. It's sort of like not a natural thing that people have to do that we make them do. And then we get surprised that people work around the security technology because it doesn't fit into their way they work. People like rivers, they find the easiest way down the hill, and we so often haven't been that easiest way. So that's why digital empathy is really important, because it's really actually stop thinking about how we, as maybe cybersecurity or technology professionals, might think about this, but think about how people actually use and engage with it.
So, Sian, your point about you know, the lockdown and COVID and the impact that has, I think, is very well made. And it seems to me that it's at times like these that we need empathy more than ever. You know, the modern workplace is changing more quickly than ever before. It's going through fundamental change. I suspect more security controls have been put in place over the last 18 months to respond to the particular challenges of people working from home. But do we know more or less about the daily stresses and strains in our employees' workload and their day-to-day frustrations? I suspect not. So for empathy to be applied to security awareness and education, do we need to start by understanding these day-to-day challenges and putting ourselves in their shoes first and foremost?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think it's obviously the pandemic's brought it home, because it's understanding, and one of the big things, it's a big thing from us as Microsoft, even outside of anything to do with security, is actually thinking about work-life balance and the genuine fatigue that comes from trying to actually sit in front of a computer all day looking at video conferences. That's very genuinely tiring. We've done some analysis around that, where you get a whole brain drain from just sitting staring at other people's pictures on the screen, never mind looking at yourself. And then you're doing that maybe with your children in the house, for some people with commitments, with the fact that they're sitting maybe at their kitchen table, they haven't necessarily got that perfect office environment. And so it's really bringing home that there's a whole work-life balance thing where that empathy needs to come in from a digital perspective, and wellness being, I know everyone's talking about it and says, oh, it's a bit of a buzzword, but it's not. It's actually a genuine thing we need to be thinking about in terms of the wellness people and work-life balance. And then security awareness fits into that. So if you're then putting a lot of pressure on people to do preparation to engage with stuff when they're already burnt out, they're not necessarily going to be thinking about the right way to do things. So from that perspective, it's actually, let's think about who people are and who we're engaging with, and actually thinking about their use case, their world, their lived experience, not our lived experience. And it's one of those things where there's a few things, like some of the social sciences really come in thinking about the concepts of cultural scripts and habitus, and the people have different experiences, where a lot of us in the security industry, we all maybe work with technology, so things are just natural to us to use, aren't necessarily natural if you went, I don't know, through being a legal route or a lawyer route, or you're a telephone engineer, whatever it might be, that's suddenly having to engage with technology, and you're suddenly getting a lot of instructions about things to do that aren't necessarily sitting in your lived experience. So I think that's what we've really got to think about is, A, we've all got quite a lot of us have a technical mindset, and B, there's also a healthy dose of paranoia that sits in a lot of cybersecurity professionals, where they just wouldn't click on that link. And so then they don't understand why people do, or, you know, when people are busy, although they're getting so good now that a lot of cybersecurity professionals even click on that link. But it's that whole idea of people don't trust social media. They don't do social media. They don't do cloud. They don't want to do mobile because they've got a slightly paranoid outlook. But that's not the place where someone's coming from business. And that's why digital empathy is important for security awareness. It's also important for running the business. So often I've heard people that I've worked with say, I'm not going to let the business do social media or go to the cloud. It's just too risky. But actually, if they don't do that digital transformation, their competitors are. So there's actually a business risk that comes if you don't change, if you don't use these new technologies. And a security person saying, that's too risky, you can't do it, is not being empathetic actually to the business need. That is, if we don't do that, well, right, we'll be more secure, but we won't have a business. And that's the thing we need to be thinking about every day, I think.
I defend at this point, Nick. I think several of us want to comment on that. But let's absolutely fundamentally agree. And it goes back to what is the critical question that I've come to over the last couple of years in particular. Security people, by definition, are not normal people. Security people are black and white people, are Manichaean in their approach to these things. And as soon as you start getting into, if I may say so, the kind of touchy-feely issues that you mentioned, not least with working from home, it really raises that fundamental question: are security people the right people to be doing this?
Well, there's a question. Was that a question, or was that rhetorical? Or
no, it was. I'm very interested to hear Sian comment on that.
Sorry, Sian. My view on that, Richard, is I see this whole area as being multidisciplinary. It has to be. It can't just be security. It has to be a range of people and a range of skills that are creating and developing interventions, training intervention, ideas, innovation in ways that are empathetic to your employees. And critically, as I said at the outset, for me, the employees have got to play a critical role in that, and they should be actively involved in discussing and balancing both their day-to-day priorities with the need to do security safely and easily.
Yeah, and Sian touched on this, and Sian, I'd be interested to hear you say a little bit more about it. I think security people need to start, as it were, by examining themselves. I mean, how do you get security people accepting the approach that you're talking about?
Well, I think it's a journey we're on, isn't it? And we've been on it for the last 4 or 5 years, and I don't know how many meetings I go to when everyone says we need to make the board care about us, or we need to start talking the board's language, or we need to engage in the business environment. And it's really just living that. Walking that walk, not just talking the talk. It's actually, and you're seeing that change. I mean, if you compare 5 or 6 years ago to now, there's a lot more of a mix of people that are actually thinking about the people and engagement, and technical people sitting in security roles. You always do have those business focused CISOs now, and there's a number of them I can name, and they do tend to be the most successful ones, the ones that are really thinking about how to communicate, thinking about how people actually tend to be very empathetic human beings, actually, because not everyone who's in security is completely lacking empathy, but they tend to be, empathetic from a technical background, but then they've moved into business. Also, some of them have come from risk and compliance backgrounds or different backgrounds into it. I mean, I think I can show you a bad example of the industry and where they need to grow up. Is when the Experian breach happened, there was a lot of comment about, grow up sounds really, that's not being very empathetic language, is it? I just realised that. Where there was a lot of comment when the Experian breach happened about how the CISO had a degree in music. And I'm like, well, what's that got to do with anything? That just means they've got a broader bunch of experience. When I went to university, there wasn't a cybersecurity degree. Even even computer science, you have to study hard at A-level than I did to be able to do that. So it's like, and that's, if I look at the students I'm working with today, a lot of them, the computer science they're learning is the computer science of 5 years ago. It's not necessarily the cloud or any of the stuff that's there now. So actually, what's wrong with having a music degree? What's wrong with having a history degree? What's wrong with never having a degree? Because it's about the skill set you bring, not necessarily the qualification. And I will say on the, should it just be security people? I did used to joke before the GDPR came in, but it was only a half joke. It's sort of quite serious as well. Is that in terms of writing the messaging about GDPR, is we should get the marketing, and privacy and important of protecting data and doing the right thing. So you should get the marketing team to do it because they really understand how to share a message. But they also, when it came to GDPR, probably the people that it most applied to and were probably the worst offenders. So they in terms of actually writing it, you quite often internalize things when you create it. So I think absolutely it needs to go beyond the security department. It needs to work with everyone together thinking about that messaging, but also people in security need to, and you don't have to go get an MBA, because if you get an MBA and you don't start to understand people, it doesn't help. It's not about the qualification, it's about the engaging with people and asking them questions and listening and understanding from that perspective. I think not assuming, and I think the best people in security don't do this, not assuming that you're the cleverest person in the room, in every room you're in. Even
can I just make one comment, because I see I'm in danger of raising a Twitter storm when I said that security people weren't normal people. I meant that in the very specific context of having a black and white approach to security issues. So please forgive me, those of you who are offended.
No, I completely agree. So, but because it tends to be a special type of person that it appeals to, particularly if you're of a certain age, because you were there looking at all these things happening and going, oh, you want to make a more secure environment. And actually the positive side of being special people is virtually everyone in this industry is motivated to try and make the world a safer place. Whereas not everybody that you're working, they don't want to make it a more dangerous place, but a lot of who you're supporting just want to get their job done, so they don't necessarily come with that same motivation.
Sian, I was reading a couple of days ago that in Microsoft, your CEO, empathy, it's a central part of his mission. I was also on a recent call with somebody else, and they said it's also a key driver of business success, and that's a FTSE 100 CEO and board. So the question for me is, where do you think, should empathy, does it necessarily have to come top down, or can it and should it be very much bottom up, bearing in mind that empathy is all about putting ourselves in the shoes of others, the employees that we're trying to educate. Is it more effective, do you see, as a bottom up or top down, or a combination of the two?
Yeah. So if you read Satya Nadella's book, do a plug for my CEO's book, but and then I started to do a plug for it without remembering the full name, something success. It's a very good book. I have to look over my shoulder to remember what it's called, because I've got it on the shelf, obviously. But he actually talks about this thing of trying to inculcate a growth mindset. So semantic historic. Oops, sorry, that's my old employer. That's not very good growth mindset. Is it Microsoft historically? I haven't worked for them for years. So Microsoft historically, we're known for being a little bit more fixed mindset. Let's put it that way. The experts are there. It's full of very, very clever people. Some of the cleverest people I've ever worked with in my career work at Microsoft. But it was like everyone would be in the room and they'd be the expert, and they'd all have to run like that. And what he wants to do is change that culture to have a growth mindset, a continually learning mindset, a looking to be better mindset. And a part of that is building empathy. Now, you can't change it everywhere. He's actually says in the book, you've got to build this up from the ground up. What's it called? Culture beats strategy every time. So literally it's about engagement. And so, as a manager at Microsoft, we have our actual manager template is model, coach, and care. So it's model the right behavior, coach your employees to help them to do the right thing, and care about people. And as we've gone through the pandemic, as a manager at Microsoft, you get a lot of resources and support to say, are you checking in with your team? Are you caring about them? Are you making sure they've got the wellness? And then actually, for the last 6 months, it's been, and are you okay? Because we're aware that a lot of managers are burning themselves out looking after other people, not me, but other people. But that's the that's the sort of, so it's trying to instill that. And I'm not going to say that everywhere in Microsoft it behaves like that. It has that culture, has that empathy and that model culture care. It's a journey, but it is a thing that everyone's quite proud of and engaged with and trying to deliver and trying to engage and trying to work on. And I think now, if you have a call with some extremely clever people, they will, and I think they probably would have done this anyway, but they will sit there and they will take time and they will care and they will engage with those people. So, you know, the students we had in over the summer, they were talking to some of our most advanced researchers about topics, and people just took the time to spend with them. And I think that's, you can't make a cultural change without going in from the bottom up. You know, and we actually have I'm going to put one little plug in for us again, is we have our standards of business conduct training that everyone has to do, which covers lots of topics around cybersecurity awareness, but also, you know, harassment, bullying, insider trading. It does it as a soap opera. And literally, when they send out the email going, you need to do your training, and you get, oh, they make sure you do it, you make sure you do it. Everyone is queuing up because we all want to know what happens to Nelson. And everyone, they just had season 5. I see Nelson's one of the characters. So season 5 last week, and Brad Smith, our chief legal officer in the video in the beginning, he was wearing a Nelson t-shirt, and then someone else was a little bit of a joke, and everyone's enjoying it. Now everyone's going, I seriously want a Nelson t-shirt. They're like heroes in our organization. And the standards, and I remember a lot more about what you should do because it's in a soap opera, and it's got a cliffhanger, and then they have each episode, and then they have, well, this is what they did wrong, or then here's some documentation you can go and read. And I think that's a sort of trying to build that empathy, but we're not perfect, but it's that aim.
It's a great cue, Sian, to the next sort of area I want to sort of touch on, which is I see strong links between empathy, storytelling and security education. It's about sharing, listening to and learning from other people's experiences, and we don't do enough of that. Interested in your thoughts, both you and Richard, about how storytelling can be used to enhance empathy, and also touching on a second question, which is empathy in itself is a skill in itself, and how do we learn and teach the skills to be empathetic to all of our people as well? Because we're all responsible to, you know, we all need to be empathetic. So you know, how can we make that work? Certainly sort of in the new hybrid working world as well.
You want to go first, Richard, or do you want me to go first?
Well, let me just make a comment, and Sian, I think we're more interested in hearing from you than from me, but I think storytelling is absolutely crucial. And what comes to my mind immediately was a difficult executive committee meeting in one of my former companies, where I was looking for a pretty big investment and getting treated skeptically, as often happens. And I just told a brief anecdote to illustrate the risk that was at play in this particular case. And a lively discussion started going around the table because it chimed with other people's experience who were on the executive committee. And they began to see the reality of what I was trying to get across. So storytelling for me, absolutely fundamental. If you just stick with the dry statistics, it's not going to get you, well, it'll get you a certain way, of course, because the people on boards tend to be accountants or people with financial backgrounds, but get a story and suddenly everything comes alive. But Sian, please, interested in your point.
I agree completely. I suppose about standards of business conduct training was an example of that. They're telling a story, and it is a proper like serial, and then you get into it. But I think storytelling is that's what we need to be doing. Humans learn by telling stories. It's how we started. It's how we connect. And actually, those storytellers, this is where we need to get better. And I think the sort of things people are doing in terms of, and not just around security awareness, but talking anything about security let's not spread. So if you're watching a story and the story has a horrible ending and everyone dies, there are certain people that enjoy it, and probably an above average amount of people in the security industry probably are those people that enjoy it. I don't mind a nice disastrous ending every now and then, but people want to see the dream and the where we're going and the positive side of it. And too often we're selling the doom and gloom story, even when we are selling a story. It's sort of like, it's all horrible, it's all going to be over, but it's more like, actually, let's sell the dream and where you can go and what the outcome could be, and then focus. yes, you do need to have some stats and facts in there to say if you don't do anything, there will be consequences, because otherwise people go, oh, I won't bother, it'll be fine. So, but be almost like, what's that whole ring cycle, that the traditional storytelling of it starts, everything goes horribly wrong, and then it gets a bit better at the end because you do something. I suppose going back to Homer, I suppose, and the Iliad and all that sort of stuff. Well, we need to be sort of thinking about that in the way we tell the story. We quite often have it's all doom and gloom, and then can you give me some money, and then it might not be doom and gloom, but it might be. And the reality is we've got to deal with the fact that even if you get all the money, something may still happen. So why don't you focus on well, here's the threat, if you get this in, we can mitigate it in that way and sell that story. And I do think we need to do it more. I mean, for me personally, I like to communicate by stories. I've never found an analogy I can't push to the point where it actually breaks apart and becomes useless, or mix my metaphors. Love it a bit, but I think that's where we need to go. And that's actually when you look at some of the work. I think you had Lizzie Coles-Kemp on in the last. That's some of the work that she's doing, and then also Genevieve Lively at Bristol University, working with the Alan Turing Institute, looking at how you can actually tell cyber through storytelling, and how you can look at the futures through storytelling. I think that is the thing we really need to engage and work with. And I do keep going back to our standards. And they started to use the same thing for our security training. So you've got the click, 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 but then you've got a guy who's a bit funny in the middle of it, doing something that's, so when they're talking about our latest training about don't have, you're sitting working from home, you've got personal speakers, make sure it's either in a different room or you mute it or something like that. The way they had it is they had the guy try and get a pair of earmuffs and put the earmuffs onto the personal speaker before someone came and turned it on. It's very silly, but it's a story, and then it's a bit more engaging than make sure you turn off Alexa when you're sitting in your home office. Yeah, so I think that's something we need to think about.
I was just going to make a comment, Nick, that's one of our guests is making a comment about the fact of watching a soap opera is obviously much more interesting than listening to a dry presentation, and that really is a cue for you for the book you published a couple of years ago, which told a story and which we still need to turn into a television or a radio play, I have to say.
Yes, thank you, Richard. I thought you were going to say that we should all adopt soap characters then, but yeah, it was about 4 or 5 years ago now, when I was in my old role. I thought it would be a good idea to, using storytelling and to write a story. It was a thriller. It was a CEO cyber thriller called Whaling for Beginners, and it told the story of a guy called Jim Baines, completely fictional, but obviously based on real life, who found himself the target and victim of a cyber attack. And it told the emotional journey that he went on, and the impact it had on his business. And it had the goodies and the baddies. And for me, cyber is just so ripe for fantastic storytelling. And the feedback we had from that, the book was designed to be read targeting senior executives. The feedback we have was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And it was used in many boardrooms, I understand, and copied to many board colleagues. We then sort of advanced that technique, and working again with the author of that book, we worked with a couple of our clients to actually create shorter stories, working with their staff, our clients' staff, and actually sort of, and I suppose it's an empathetic approach, sitting down with them, listening to their stories, listening to real life incidents that they'd been through, and then converting those into anonymized little stories, vignettes that were related. And the other important thing here is related to them. Any other member of staff within that particular organization, and one was in the sports industry, for example, could relate to that and understand that. I think that's really important, that in storytelling, it's relatable as much as possible. So if you're working in a particular sector, then ideally that story can and should relate to that particular industry, because people will relate to that more. But yes, thank you for that cue, Richard. I think the other thing for me fundamentally is it's been proven for many years that we learn best through real experiences that we face at work. It's experiential, and I think we've lost that obviously during lockdown in working from home. And we it happens through daily tasks, experience and practice, and critically in the good old days, talking with our colleagues the water cooler discussions that we have. And I think we've missed those dreadfully, and we need to convert that storytelling. I know Lizzie, for example, at Royal Holloway has been doing a lot of work around the way in which some of the techniques that she was using pre-lockdown as turning those into online tools and techniques as well. So yeah, what do we think as well about the do we need this training for people? Where could we possibly start with this training, making people, the process by which we actually educate our own people about how to be empathetic?
So I'll sort of pick up that Richard said that security people are special. Yes, they are, but they're not psychopaths or sociopaths. And I think everyone who's not a sociopath has empathy built into who we are. It's like, obviously, different levels and different engagements and how you work on it. It's part of being a human being to think about other people and obviously to have some empathy that they might have a different experience to you, and that you watch somebody falling over or being poorly in hospital or whatever it might be, and you sort of care. And there's two sides of that. There's sympathy, which is you care, and you get a bit emotional about it, but you don't really, actually, well, it's awful that that's happening to them. And then there's empathy that says, well, I understand that where that might be, and how can I help and engage with this? We do have empathy as part of being human. It's just a muscle we need to work, isn't it, really? And it's just reminding people that just because it's technology doesn't mean you throw away the part of you that's human. I'm not saying that, a lot of people have different ways of engaging with it, and obviously with different backgrounds of engagement, and actually, if people have neurodiversity and things like that, but even everyone has the ability to some extent engage in empathy, but it's about how you do it, and it's actually making it true to you. So we're not saying to people you have to go around and start hugging a user or whatever it might be, or being which is not actually what we're talking about. Empathy is not about tea and biscuits and sympathy. Empathy is about understanding the situation in which someone else might be. So you understand that someone's sitting at home, maybe with their family and their children, and they're sitting on the kitchen table, and there's a lot of distractions going on around them, and they're trying to do the work. And even in an open plan office, there could be a lot of distractions going around you, or it's the end of quarter and it's their deadline and they've got things to do. Now you can understand that. The sympathetic thing would be say, oh, it's really awful, just carry on and do with it. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to say, okay, so that's, we know where you are, doesn't mean that you haven't got to take the right steps to be secure. So it's actually being empathetic to the fact that you might be in that situation and thinking, how do we make what we do and our technology and the messaging that we give you understanding of that experience you're in? We're not letting you off the requirement to not leak or not send out all the credit cards in an email place to somebody and like that. It's actually going, okay, so if I need you to classify a document, let's not make you click 15 things to do that before you've got there. When we're actually teaching you about what the classification should be in security awareness or the importance of protecting data, let's not write it all in legalese language. Let's write it in a way that talks about the risk to you and what might happen, and actually what the simple steps are you could take to be secure. So that whole USB key, the don't just say, oh, don't plug it in, it's disgusting. Go, well, if you plugged it in, these are the things that could happen for you. You don't really want that, do you? Why don't you just hand it over to somebody? Oh, and you want to be able to share files with people, not you can't do it. It's more like, this is the secure way to do it. But don't make that secure. So for me, empathy is about the awareness training, but it's also, don't make the security technology so awful to engage with that people have to be so bought in to doing security that they're going to do it. If your security technology puts 20 agents on the computer and slows it down so it takes 15 minutes to boot up, or requires someone to click on things 3 times, or uses a classification system that's just not intuitive to people, so they have to go and look at what it means, and they have to basically spend 30 minutes training themselves to understand how to do the right thing, that's not empathetic. It's more like, well, that person's busy, how do I give you the message, how do I make it too easy to engage with, and then how do I plug that into the security awareness training so that you go, phishing's a problem, these are the sort of things to look for. Don't click on it. Oh, if you did click on it, are you worried? Don't worry about it. Here's the really simple way to report it. And we're not going to blame you, because we know things happen. Because if something like that does happen, you don't want people to go, oh, I'm so scared of getting told off. You want them to go, oh, I think I might have clicked on something. Let me report it. So it's that. And that's empathetic, is to go, look, these are things to do right. We understand that some things might go wrong. Don't worry. Let us know. Yeah.
And similarly, another example is sort of the role that phishing tests, phishing simulations have played, and the number of conversations I've had, Sian, where with organizations where sadly in the past, I think this is changing quickly, but in the past where people who've opened up attachments have been blamed, and in one organization physically named and shamed, and that's just outrageous. And I'm also hearing that more and more talk in the industry about a consequence model. If you do something wrong first, once, this might happen, which might be a piece of training. If you do it twice, it might be a talk with your manager. If you do it, this to me is absolutely the wrong direction we need to go. It is about collaboration and trust, building that trust with your staff, so that they've got that, one, the confidence to be able to do things, and that security is helping them make it easy for them and quick for them to do these things. And
you can't make that context aware, though, I will say, because we did have a thing at my old employer, Semantic, where you weren't allowed to install peer-to-peer file sharing. And there was a 3 strikes out, and you're out on that one, because it's not like you clicked on a link. It's like, so the first email told you what the risk was about file sharing. The second one was your manager, and the third one was a CEO saying, right, that's it, you're on disciplinary and you're out. Because literally peer-to-peer file sharing is to give you a developer, was how source code gets out. So, but I'll go back to carry on the point.
Can I just pick up something you
Sure.
said there, because it's the word that in these talks usually comes up at about this point in the session, and that's that magic word trust, which for me is the fundamental word in all of this. And of course, empathy absolutely goes together with trust. Trust in the best companies seems to be something that just comes with the culture, but I've also been surprised by the number of companies where it's not like that. And there's some recent examples with COVID, for example. Senior people in companies have been saying, I want my people to come back into the office in a way that implies they don't trust them to work if they're working from home. And a more extreme case is those companies which have actually installed what is effectively surveillance software to make sure that people working at home are actually working, which seems to me to go really against the idea of a proper culture within a company.
Yeah, and another example for me is, I think we all know and appreciate the importance of reporting incidents, but again, there's ways and means that can make reporting incidents much more easier and empathetic to your staff. So make it easy for them to report incidents. Make it voluntary for them as well, so that people see it as a normal part of their job. Don't sort of name and shame, so protect the identity of anyone reporting, which helps to build the trust. And then it's that follow-up as well, critically. It's all very well for me listening, but then it's the feedback that we provide, the feedback loop we provide to staff about keeping them informed about the benefits of them reporting an incident and the actions that have been taken as a result. And that's absolutely critical for me. It's all very well listening, but we need to actually then respond and keep them updated as well.
We actually did a phishing test recently, and we never name and shame. So if you do something wrong, you get the, well, this, if you click on, I actually never clicked on the link, so I don't know what happens. But if you click on the link, apparently you do get a reminder of training, things like that. But then if you get it, you do report message. Now, was an interesting one the last time that I got one, well, the last time I got one that I noticed and I clicked on report, and I clicked on report message, because that's what you're supposed to do. Carried on, blah, blah, blah. And then, like, when they'd obviously finished the test, they sent me an email to say, well done, you clicked on report message. And I'm like, what, 25 years in the industry? And I went, oh, I did the right thing, even though I should have done the right thing, because it was a very obvious phishing test. But actually, that is the way to do it, because even me, 25 years, I should hope that I know that it's a phishing attack. I still sat there and went, oh, And I even put to it, don't you feel quite proud for actually, and everyone going, yeah, we all got the little green tick thing, and that's a little empathy and playing on psychology, that everyone likes to get the little gold star from the teacher, and it was effectively a little gold star from the teacher for reporting it, and everyone's going, oh, I got a thing for reporting it, and then the next time, see, almost rewarding people for reporting and for noticing, and it is that whole gamification thing, but in the positive way, because there's a reason why they publish the winners medals in a gamification and not the losers. No one wants to be in that last 10 people. And I speak as the person who at school, I'm overweight because I could never run. I'm not that I don't run because I'm overweight. And so I was that child at school that was like, when it was like running races, everyone's like, yeah, you're last, because I literally cannot run. So I know what it's like to be the last that's picked. And no one wants to be published being that last person. So that whole naming and shaming is just not, that's not an empathetic, or actually, if we're going to use psychology and empathy, and that's where the whole game, I actually sort of like the gamification that's happening, but I don't always like the way it's used, if you know what I mean. I think that positive reinforcement thing, and actually doing it on that individual level, so it wasn't like here's the top 10 people to report a competitive way, it was a well done. And I think that's what we should do more of that.
Definitely, I agree. I was also talking to a colleague of mine works as or not a colleague, a friend of mine who is responsible for security education at one of the big law firms recently, and he talks about his work, that he sees as much of his work being the job of humanizing security for staff, and he spends half of his time actually sitting down, talking, listening to people, colleagues of his, and looking at ways in which they can make it easier and give them more confidence to do the right thing. So it's all about how we can identify and make what might be very simple tweaks to security policies to make it more convenient and quicker for them to do the right thing. And for me, that's so much more than awareness. It's giving our people the confidence and the ability, which you mentioned earlier, Sian, and the motivation to behave securely. And I think also with what's happened with the lockdown and people working from home, the value of actually giving them information and training about how to look after their own or their family's information, I think is a really important element of this whole area of security awareness these days.
Actually, one of the things I keep thinking is I've always been one of those people that could be quite technical, but I always said that my skill was to be able to take those technical concepts and explain them in plain English. I'm saying not very plain English, but actually that, I think I always sort of had it, but was really honed that my first proper job in IT was in a college in York, and it was like I had two sort of jobs there that really were home. So one was they wanted to implement a room booking system. I was just doing it as a temping job while I was doing a master's, but I had to implement this room booking system. It was really easy. They bought a new computer system that would help them work out when rooms were free and book it. That took me 2 weeks to get it all set up and configured and all the rooms in it. It took me 4 weeks to get Anne Cheetham, who had spent the last 20 years of her career using an A1 sheet of paper and working out who went in one room, and actually had things like, well, I know that Ruth doesn't like that room, so even if the computer gives her that room, I can't give her that room. And it's actually putting all that in and getting her to understand how she can still do that in the computer really brought home to me that yes, that computer was really good at automatically sorting it, but it didn't have Anne's built-in knowledge of having done that job for 20 years, and the fact that, lecturers, I'm sorry, Richard knows this thing, and they obviously they have certain preferences, and you've got to reflect that preference, otherwise they will not be happy, and they'll be in your office, and they'll be in the Vice Chancellor's office, and there'll be all sorts of outcomes. So that was a real, and then the other one was the idea of the job I then did was quite, sort of a permanent job, was I was migrating actually student data, but that's my job. I was supposed to be doing writing org scripts, getting very techie to take things from one Unix system to another Unix system, and then I was sitting there with the system admin Jack. My job actually changed because Jack spoke Unix, he didn't speak English, and so every meeting Jack went into with a registrar who was a PhD in chemistry but didn't speak Unix, was they insisted that I was in the room, and I was literally the Jack translator. that was my second job. And it just brought home to me that need to be able to explain what you're doing in plain English. And I think sometimes we haven't had to do that in security to the same extent. And if you can't explain it in plain English to somebody who doesn't speak security,
critical, absolutely critical, absolutely critical. Those that have attended previous webinars will know that I'm also very interested to learn from other domains, not just security, because I do feel security sometimes can be a bit of an echo chamber. So I'm just wondering, Sian, Richard, whether you've got any other experience of empathy, digital empathy in other domains.
I suppose I've sort of been talking about ours from our perspective in terms of, digital empathy at Microsoft isn't actually a security thing. It's actually part of the modern work thing. And so it's been the whole thinking about people working from home, and actually as we now go into hybrid work, so there's a lot of how do we be empathetic when people go back in the business? How do we make sure hybrid meetings work? And we're all getting a lot of guidance sent out at the moment about if you've got a mix, people in room, people remote, we want everyone on the Teams meeting so everyone can be seen on the face by the people remotely. You need to have a facilitator, you need to make sure you make space for people, you need to have an understanding. That's absolutely, where work, and it's actually how do we think about the future work and empathy for that. So from us, it's a general technology thing, of which security is there. But yeah, there's so many other applications, and I could go on, but I'll let Richard come in with some instead. So that's
just a simple example from my experience. A major part of my responsibility in multinationals was always trying to engage with the board and communicate with the board, and really trying to understand where they were coming from. And I think for the traditional class of senior security officer, this was a real struggle. We've already said security people tend to see things in black and white terms. It's obvious, self-evident that certain things need to be done to support security, when in fact senior executives are living on a different planet when it comes to those things. And understanding what their priorities are and what their thought processes are was actually really fundamental. And I remember in one company starting, in a sense, from a really low base. And the first executive committee member I spoke to said, nice to meet you. He'd never met my predecessor. He said, I have the faintest idea what you people do, but I'm sort of vaguely aware that you might be important, I suppose, a bit like tax. And that always lived with me, that experience. After 3 or 4 years of regular conversations, and as I say, trying to understand where he was coming from and vice versa, we actually developed a very good relationship. But you need to work at these things. You really need to work at these things. Empathy is fundamental.
Thank you, Richard. I'm slightly conscious of time, but my own experience, I'll be very quick, and I'll try not to sort of burden you with my own health problems. But I had a major operation about 3 years ago, which was quite scary at the time. And my experience of this was in the health sector. And it's something that Angela Sass from UCL talks about quite regularly, the difference between compliance and concordance in the health sector. Compliance being where the relationship that the patient has with the health professional is one basis. It's often paternalistic or sometimes even sort of autocratic, where you're given instructions by the health professional and you just take it as read. Now, and being labelled sort of non-compliant by the health professional becomes a barrier to empathizing with that person's perspective. So my experience is that I was waiting for this major operation. I'd been a surgeon had been appointed to me, and my wife and I went to see the surgeon, and he was absolutely all around compliance. He really did not care about my feelings, my fears, my concerns, my issues. It was an operation. It was a process he was going to go through, and he's going to tell me how he was going to do it, and that was it. Fortunately, for other reasons, I was then assigned a different surgeon, a second surgeon. The difference between the two was fantastic. It was incredible. He sat me down and absolutely the first thing he said was, take me through, what are your fears of this? And there were different ways in which that operation could happen. And we agreed in partnership how that would be best for me, and it was a very, very positive experience, and so that for me is my personal experience, and it's something I know the health industry is very strong at doing, is And some people talk about bedside manner. I think it's slightly more than that, but it's absolutely an approach now where the health professionals work harder at understanding the fears and challenges that the actual patients have. So Sian, just a final question. I'm conscious of time. We've got 5 minutes left. Could you just sort of coming back to Microsoft? What's the Microsoft's digital empathy mission and strategy for the next 2 to 3 years? Would you say where would be good in the next 2 years?
So I'll do two sides of that. So one is on obviously the modern working, the information worker environment. And for us, it's really to actually support that future work. We've got a lot of research on the future work to actually think about the hybrid working experience. Even if people go back to the office, we were already on that digital transformation journey anyway, so it's going forward. So actually thinking about how we can design the technology to help make things more resting. So we've already got things like in Teams, it has a integration with Headspace, and it'll do like virtual commutes, and it'll give you insights about the fact that you're maybe working too much out of hours and you need to check what you're doing. And there's a whole Viva Insights thing. So that's one side, is actually thinking about how people work and operate, and really working on work-life balance and wellness in a digital world, and helping that hybrid working to work. On the security side, our real focus is actually how do we build, and we talked about this for a while as Microsoft, is a big focus for us anyway, but it's actually how do you build security into that productivity experience? How do you make it natural rather than something that's unnatural? And actually part of that is actually how do we make it, take the complexity out of security? How do we make it easier and simpler? And there's that, going back to analogies, there's the tile car model, which actually applies because there's so many things in a car that you don't notice that are there to keep you secure. And then there's things like seat belts, which keep you secure, but they're also there to nudge you and remind you about the fact that you're driving a ton. I think something that's a ton, and brakes and things like that. So that's the sort of thing for us, is to actually make it more simple and easy to use for people, be more empathetic the way people use, put it into productivity, both from the user, but also from the developer, thinking about DevSecOps and things like that. And then finally, actually being empathetic to the security professional, because they've got so many tools and things they've got to look at to manage the risk. For us, it's like, how do we give some visibility, some consolidation, and some simplicity to their lives as well, and help them to make life simpler, because as threats are going up, it's becoming more and more stressful to work in security, and there are so many more attacks and there's so much more pressure than that. Those are sort of the three foci.
That's a good point. That's a good point. One question that lots of chats, so thank you for all your comments, everyone. One question here, have you found it challenging to implement processes around digital empathy? Is it personalized and tailored to individuals' employee needs? What is the best way to approach this type of change management?
So do you want me to, so I think one of the ways to start is obviously it's great ultimately to get to the individual level, but it's quite hard. Let's just start with actually thinking about the fact that not everyone's a security professional. So actually thinking about, and it's one of those things where it's actually, I've seen this in quite a few customers as well, to start thinking about user personas. So don't lock everyone down like they're a global admin. Don't lock everyone down like they're doing payments for thousands and millions of pounds. Making it that whole risk-centric and appropriate level of security, and actually saying, so someone who's sitting doing info worker work is different to someone who's in the payment accounts payable, and that's different to maybe somebody who's a field worker that's going out and servicing equipment, and actually making sure that what you're designing is appropriate to that persona, and not just your perception of that persona, what they actually do. So the same way we went on, the same journey we supposedly went on in IT, or to varying degrees of actually understand the user and design to their use case, that's where we need to be in security. And yes, ultimately, we need to get to the point where it's personalized and it's there for people. But I think at the beginning, it's not do one size fits all security, do an appropriate level. That's where zero trust actually, by the way, comes in to a large extent. Because we've gone zero trust at Microsoft, and a lot of people have. It's that whole idea of, explicitly verify, least privilege access, and assume compromise. If you have that, then you don't have any extensive trust that says, I've got to lock you down. I don't trust you. And we were already on this journey, and we finished it during the transition. If I go into our Reading offices, I am not sitting on the corporate network. I'm sitting on a completely separate network. The only thing I actually need corporate network access to do is print, and people don't print that often anymore. Everything else I do through Office 365 to the cloud, I put the controls there, and then that means that the things that are sitting in the more secure environment, you keep it. So it is about segmentation, architecture, and designing around the use case.
Thank you, Sian. That's fantastic. Just a couple of additional points from me. My advice is start simple. Don't try and do this in one big push. Start simple, start at an individual level, team level, and make it timely. Any sort of discussions, just make it, or any interventions, make them timely to the actual that event happening, whether someone displays a risky behavior. Make sure that we're responding and talking with those individuals as quickly as possible at that time that it's happening. I am conscious of time, so thank you, Sian. That's been fantastic. Thank you, Richard, for your input as well. Thank you to everyone for your comments, some very positive comments there. I would just like to take this opportunity to do a bit of a advertisement for the next 2 webinars that we have coming up. People Matter webinars. We have one on the 6th of November. Hopefully you see that on the screen now, when Kerry from NatWest is talking about, and
6th of October, Nick.
Sorry, what did I say? 6th of October, sorry. Is talking about putting people at the heart of your security awareness, which is obviously quite similar to the discussion we've had today. And then Ellie on the 3rd of November, Ellie, who runs the training and awareness globally for Standard Chartered Bank, has agreed to talk to us. And we've agreed that the key thing there we're going to talk about is the importance of diversity, particularly cognitive diversity. And the role that plays in educating and making your people aware. So thank you everyone for your time and effort. If there's any further questions, please do let us know. Richard and I will be only too happy to receive your feedback. We're always open to feedback to these sorts of events. How was it for you? Give us the good, the bad and the ugly, please. We like to think that having sort of a fireside chat with no slides is better than death by PowerPoint, but let us know what you think, please. If you have any ideas for topics for future discussion or potential speakers, please also do let us know. We have 3 booked in for the next 3 months, so we're now looking at programming events into next year. So many thanks for your help, and we look forward to talking again very soon. Hopefully you'll be able to attend the next one on the 2nd of October. Many thanks. Any final comments, Sian and Richard?
No, just thank you. I've just checked the chat. I'm sorry I wasn't able to check it when I was waffling on. It's really great points in there, and I agree with most of what people said. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. And from my point of view, Sian, thanks very much. That was really insightful and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sian. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Take care.
Thank you.